Imagine being 12 years old and discovering that your entire future has already been sold to strangers. This is the story of a girl who would transform from powerless child into the most dangerous woman in English history. December 1443, and winter grips Bletsoe Castle like a frozen fist. You stand trembling in the great hall, not from cold, but from the terrifying realization that these men discussing your fate see you as nothing more than valuable livestock. The limestone walls rise 3 stories above your head, built thick enough to withstand siege warfare, yet they cannot protect you from what's about to happen. Margaret Beaufort, that's your name, though it might as well be property of the crown for all the control you have over it. Noble blood flows through your veins, descended from kings, but being born female has stripped that bloodline of any power. You're an heiress worth more than most kingdoms, yet you cannot even choose what you'll eat for breakfast tomorrow. But here's what those men don't know. Behind your downcast eyes burns an intelligence that will eventually destroy them all. Fresh rushes scatter beneath your feet, mint and rosemary crushed underfoot, their sweet scent masking the decay that festers beneath. The irony isn't lost on you even at 12. Everything beautiful in this world seems designed to hide something rotten underneath. Candlelight flickers across the faces of lords and bishops, their breath forming small clouds as they discuss your substantial holdings in Somerset, Devon, and Dorset. William de la Pole, Duke of Suffolk, your guardian and current owner, gestures toward you with a jeweled hand. The marriage alliance now secures those holdings for our cause, he declares, as if you're a strategic castle to be captured rather than a human being. You want to ask what cause he means, but 12-year-old girls don't interrupt when powerful men are reshaping the map of England. What you're witnessing is the moment your childhood dies, and something far more dangerous begins to take its place. Standing near the massive fireplace, John de la Pole fidgets uncomfortably. At 14, he's hardly more than a child himself, his hands too large for his wrists, his voice still cracking when he speaks. He will become your husband within the month. He glances at you once, quickly, then looks away as if the sight of you embarrasses him. Neither of you understands that you're both pawns in a game where the penalty for losing is death. The negotiations conclude with handshakes and wine, sealing a contract that will bind your body to his, your lands to his family, your future to his bloodline. The word marriage sounds so innocent, so romantic in the stories. But this isn't a story. This is a business transaction where you are simultaneously the currency and the commodity being purchased. February arrives with frost covering the ground like scattered diamonds. Your wedding day dawns clear and bitterly cold. The blue silk gown they've tailored for you weighs more than your entire future self-determination. It's the color of royalty, they tell you, though you feel more like a prisoner being led to execution. The elaborate headdress makes your neck ache, and you cannot escape the feeling that you're a child playing dress-up in someone else's life. Here's the truth they'll never tell you about medieval weddings. Consent is just a word in Latin that means nothing when you're female and valuable. Bletsoe's chapel feels smaller than a tomb. Stone walls absorb every sound, every prayer, every desperate breath. You kneel on the freezing floor, Latin words you barely understand tumbling from your lips. Ego Margaretti in Maritum Recipio. I, Margaret, take you, John, as my husband. The words taste like ashes, like the end of everything you might have been. John's voice cracks as he recites his own vows, binding you both to a fate neither of you chose. That night, in the darkness of your marriage chamber, you discover what it truly means to be someone else's property. The law demands consummation to make the marriage valid, but the law cares nothing for the fact that children cannot meaningfully consent to what they don't understand. You endure what must be endured, because that's what noble daughters are trained to do from birth. But in 1444, fever claims your young husband. Jean de la Pole dies suddenly, leaving you a 13-year-old widow whose marriage was never fully consummated. Under English law, this means your inheritance remains your own, your valuable merchandise returned to the market, available for the next buyer. The rushes beneath your feet continue to mask what rots underneath. But you're beginning to understand something that will change everything. If you're going to survive this world of men who see daughters as coins to be spent, you'll need to become far more dangerous than any of them suspect. The powerless child is learning to think like a predator, and that transformation will reshape the crown of England itself. At 13 years old, Margaret receives news that will shatter any remaining illusions about her freedom. King Henry VI has personally commanded her second marriage. This time, there will be no escape, no technicalities, no hope of maintaining independence. Her new owner is a man 10 years her senior with royal blood and an appetite for control that makes her first husband look like a gentle lamb. 1445, and Westminster Palace looms like a cathedral built to worship power itself. The Great Hall stretches so vast that whispered conversations echo like thunder, making privacy impossible and surveillance absolute. Margaret stands beside a carved pillar, watching the architects of her doom negotiate her fate with the casual indifference of merchants haggling over grain prices. The walls soar into shadowy heights where even candlelight cannot penetrate the darkness. Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, commands attention the moment he enters. 24 years old, broad-shouldered, moving with the predatory confidence of a man who has never been denied anything he desires. His connection to the royal family through his mother Catherine of Valois makes him untouchable, and he knows it. When he speaks about Margaret's inheritance, his voice carries the certainty of someone discussing his own property. But here's what Edmund doesn't anticipate. He's not just acquiring land and gold. He's inheriting a girl whose mind has been sharpened by suffering into something resembling a blade. The girl's estates will fund our military obligations handsomely, Edmund announces to King Henry's advisors, his eyes briefly evaluating Margaret like a horseman assessing promising breeding stock. She is young, wealthy, and most importantly, legally powerless to resist whatever he chooses to do with her. The king's endorsement transforms this arrangement from a private negotiation into a royal decree. Refusing would constitute treason against the crown itself. The wedding ceremony at Bletsoe Castle in early 1446 surpasses her first marriage in both luxury and horror. Margaret wears cloth of gold, the most expensive fabric money can purchase, and a circlet of precious gems that marks her ascending rank. But no amount of beautiful clothing can disguise the fundamental transaction taking place. A 14-year-old girl being legally transferred to a man who views her as an investment portfolio with reproductive capabilities. What happens next will prove that even royal commands cannot guarantee a happy ending. Edmund's ring slides onto Margaret's finger during the ceremony, heavy gold set with sapphires that weighs down her small hand like a shackle. His hand completely engulfs hers when he places it there, a physical reminder that she now belongs to him as completely as his horses, his armor, or his favorite hunting dogs. She will wear this ring for the remainder of her life, a permanent reminder of the moment her independence was formally surrendered to male authority. Their new household at Caldecott Castle in Wales reflects Edmund's military priorities rather than domestic comfort. Built for defense against enemy attacks rather than pleasant living, the fortress feels more like a prison than a home. Margaret's daily routine revolves entirely around Edmund's needs and schedule, with her own preferences considered only when they don't conflict with his ambitions or convenience. But Edmund makes a critical miscalculation. He underestimates the intelligence of the girl whose wealth he's commandeered. Margaret watches carefully as Edmund reorganizes her inherited estates, installing his own administrators and redirecting income toward his military campaigns. Every decision about her property is made without consulting her, every pound of revenue diverted to fund his political activities. She's learning that being wealthy in name means nothing when others control how that wealth gets used, but she's also memorizing every detail of how power actually operates. The political situation deteriorates rapidly as the Wars of the Roses begin tearing England apart. Edmund's support for the Lancastrian cause puts both him and Margaret in mortal danger as Yorkist forces grow stronger. In August 1456, Yorkist soldiers capture Edmund at Carmarthen Castle, where fever kills him within months. Margaret, now about 7 months pregnant, must face the news of her husband's death while dealing with the physical and emotional strain of advanced pregnancy. Here's the terrifying reality. She's about to give birth completely alone, with political enemies circling like wolves sensing wounded prey. January 28, 1457, Pembroke Castle. Labor begins for a 13-year-old girl whose body was never meant to endure such trauma. Medieval midwifery offers little beyond herbal remedies and desperate prayers, with mortality rates that make childbirth feel more like Russian roulette than a natural process. Hours of agony stretch endlessly as Margaret's small frame struggles with complications that threaten both mother and child. The baby who emerges from this ordeal is a son, healthy, strong, and destined to become Henry VII, first Tudor King of England. But in that moment, he's simply a newborn whose survival depends entirely on his 13-year-old mother's ability to navigate a world that wants them both dead. Margaret names him Henry after the king, a strategic choice signaling continued Lancastrian loyalty even as that loyalty becomes increasingly dangerous. Recovery proves slow and agonizing. The physical trauma leaves Margaret permanently damaged. She will never bear another child, whether from medical complications or other factors remains unclear. But what is clear is that the experience has transformed her understanding of power, survival, and the price of political ambition. The bloodstained cloths from Henry's birth become more than medical waste. They're evidence of the sacrifice required to secure political power. Margaret is learning that every throne is built on someone's suffering, and she's determined that her son's reign will be built on hers rather than his. At 15, Margaret Beaufort makes the first truly independent decision of her life. She chooses Henry Stafford as her third husband not because she loves him, but because he represents something revolutionary, a man who might actually treat her like a human being instead of valuable livestock. What she doesn't realize is that this choice will transform her from victim into the most dangerous political player in England. 1458 brings a brief respite from the nightmare of forced marriages. Henry Stafford, 30 years old, approaches Margaret with something unprecedented in her experience: genuine respect for her intelligence. Unlike her previous husbands who saw her as breeding stock with a convenient inheritance attached, Stafford recognizes the sharp mind hiding behind those carefully downcast eyes. He allows her access to tutors, political discussions, and most importantly, the education that will eventually topple kingdoms. The Wars of the Roses rage across England like a plague, turning noble families against each other in an endless cycle of betrayal and bloodshed. But Margaret is learning something crucial. Chaos creates opportunities for those smart enough to recognize them. While other nobles choose sides based on emotion or tradition, she begins studying the deeper currents of power: who controls the money, who commands real loyalty, and who possesses the strategic patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Here's what separates Margaret from every other noble woman of her time. She understands that information is more valuable than armies. Her correspondence network grows like a spider's web across England and beyond. Letters written in careful code flow between Margaret and other political players, each message building alliances that will prove crucial when the moment for action arrives. She provides financial support for the Lancastrian cause not out of sentiment, but because she's calculated that her son Henry's best chance for survival lies with Lancaster's eventual victory. Stafford's death in 1471 removes her protector, but not her momentum. Margaret, now 28 and politically educated beyond most men in the kingdom, makes her most strategic marriage yet. Thomas Stanley, Earl of Derby. Stanley has survived multiple regime changes through pure political flexibility, making him the perfect partner for Margaret's increasingly ambitious plans. Their marriage isn't about love, it's a merger between two master manipulators. But Margaret's greatest gamble is still ahead, and the stakes couldn't be higher: her son's life against the crown of England. The 80s bring Richard III's seizure of the throne and the disappearance of the princes in the Tower. For Margaret, this creates both maximum danger and maximum opportunity. Richard's brutal rise to power has shocked the nobility into reconsidering their loyalties, creating cracks in Yorkist support that a clever woman might exploit. Margaret begins the most dangerous correspondence of her life, secretly coordinating with other nobles who believe Henry Tudor represents England's best hope for stability. Every letter she writes could mean death if intercepted. Every conversation might be reported to Richard's spies. But Margaret has learned to think in decades rather than months, and she's been preparing for this moment since her son's birth. Her network of allies, carefully cultivated over 25 years, begins moving pieces into position for what will either be the most spectacular political victory in English history or the most complete destruction of everything she's worked to achieve. The decision to support Henry's invasion in 1485 represents the culmination of a lifetime spent learning how power really works in medieval England. Thomas Stanley's political survival skills prove crucial as Margaret navigates the deadly waters of Richard's court. While publicly supporting the king, Stanley provides Margaret with the cover she needs to coordinate the rebellion that will destroy him. Their marriage allows Margaret to operate as a political figure while maintaining the fiction that she's simply a dutiful wife following her husband's lead. August 22, 1485, Bosworth Field. Everything Margaret has sacrificed, every humiliation she's endured, every strategic calculation she's made over 3 decades comes down to a single battle between her exiled son and the most ruthless king England has ever known. Victory will make Henry VII. Defeat will mean execution for everyone who supported him. Here's the moment that proves intelligence can triumph over brutality. Henry Tudor's forces defeat Richard III, and Margaret's son becomes King of England. But victory tastes like ashes when you realize the price of achieving it. At 52, Margaret has gained unprecedented power as the king's mother, but she's lost any possibility of personal happiness. The broken girl who was married at 12 has become the architect of a dynasty, yet the triumph feels hollow. She's learned to play the game of politics better than any man alive, but winning has cost her everything that might have made life worth living. Letters continue to flow from her chambers, now bearing the authority of royal command rather than desperate conspiracy. Margaret's correspondence network, forged in secrecy and maintained through decades of careful cultivation, becomes the nervous system of Tudor power. The weapons she learned to wield in darkness now shape England's destiny in broad daylight. The student has become the master, but mastery in medieval politics means ruling over the ruins of everything you once hoped to protect. You stand now in the shadows of Westminster Abbey, where the child bride who was once traded like cattle has become the most formidable woman in English history. At 52, Margaret Beaufort wields power that would make kings envious, yet the victory she's fought her entire life to achieve tastes like poison in her mouth. She has learned that getting everything you want can be the cruelest punishment of all. 1485 to 1509, 24 years of unprecedented female authority in a world designed to silence women completely. Margaret's title, My Lady the King's Mother, carries weight that terrifies seasoned politicians and transforms court dynamics overnight. She influences royal appointments, shapes foreign policy, and orchestrates marriages with the precision of a master chess player moving pieces across a board made of human lives. But here's the secret that torments her during sleepless nights. Achieving ultimate power means outliving everyone who might have understood the girl she used to be. The Tudor court that Margaret helped architect operates like a finely tuned machine, but she increasingly feels like a ghost haunting halls filled with people who owe their positions to her political maneuvering. Her relationship with Henry VII combines genuine maternal affection with calculated political strategy, making it impossible to separate love from ambition. Every conversation with her son carries undertones of dynasty management and succession planning. Margaret's religious devotion intensifies as her earthly power grows, perhaps seeking divine forgiveness for the moral compromises required to secure her son's throne. She founds schools and supports religious institutions with the fervor of someone building monuments to wash away memories of the ruthless pragmatism that made such philanthropy possible. Her spiritual activities serve dual purposes: genuine faith and careful reputation management in a world where royal mothers must appear saintly. Yet, even God cannot erase the faces of everyone who died to put Henry Tudor on England's throne. Educational foundations become Margaret's preferred method of exercising soft power, creating institutions that will outlast the political machinations that built them. She understands that knowledge represents the most durable form of influence, and her investment in learning ensures that future generations will benefit from opportunities she was denied as a powerless child. Every school she establishes represents both genuine altruism and strategic legacy building. The relationship between Margaret and her son reveals the complex psychology of medieval political families. Henry VII respects his mother's intelligence while occasionally resenting her continued influence over royal decision-making. Their dynamic illustrates how personal relationships become inseparable from state policy when family members wield sovereign power. Love and politics intertwine so completely that neither can exist independently. But Margaret's greatest tragedy is approaching, and no amount of political skill can prevent it. Henry VII's death in 1509 devastates Margaret on multiple levels: personal grief for her beloved son and political anxiety about dynasty continuity. She has spent decades ensuring Tudor succession, but watching her life's work transfer to her grandson Henry VIII creates both pride and profound isolation. At 66, she represents the last living connection to the struggles that established Tudor rule. The final months of Margaret's life blend triumph with melancholy as she witnesses her grandson's coronation while confronting her own mortality. She has achieved every political goal imaginable. Her son ruled England successfully, her bloodline occupies the throne, and her dynasty appears secure. Yet personal fulfillment remains elusive, sacrificed decades earlier on the altar of political necessity and maternal devotion. Here's the ultimate irony. Margaret Beaufort transformed from powerless victim into England's kingmaker, but power couldn't restore the happiness stolen from her childhood. Margaret's death in 1509, occurring shortly after her son's passing, marks the end of an era and the completion of an extraordinary character arc. Westminster Abbey receives her body with honors befitting someone who fundamentally altered English history through intelligence, determination, and strategic patience. The bronze effigy commissioned for her tomb shows hands folded in prayer, eternal serenity carved in metal. But the monument cannot capture the fire that burned within her, the determination that transformed personal trauma into political authority, or the price she paid for achieving the impossible. The 12-year-old girl who once stood silent while men decided her future became the woman who decided England's future, proving that even the most powerless can seize control of their destiny through sheer force of will. The rushes scattered on medieval floors always masked decay underneath, but Margaret learned to transform that decay into the foundation for something greater. Her legacy lives not in the stone effigy at Westminster Abbey, but in the realization that intelligence combined with patience can overcome even the most oppressive systems. She turned her trauma into triumph, her suffering into strength, and her powerlessness into a power that reshaped kingdoms. The broken child became the architect of empire, proving that survival can be its own form of victory when wielded by someone who refuses to surrender. Her story echoes through centuries as testament to the truth that even when the world treats you as property, you can choose to become the one who decides who gets bought and sold.